This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Eleanor.
We've read another book, haven't we?
We sure have. Brainwash.
Yeah, and get your scrub brushes out because we're going to detox your mind for clearer thinking, deeper relationships, and lasting happiness. Does that sound good to you?
It does, because I realized I'm definitely brainwashed.
Yeah, I thought the title, this will be an interesting discussion about why they picked that title. This came out in 2020, and it is a Little Brown Spark, and it's another Hatchet Book Group publication. We've read several from that publisher. And the authors are a father and a son, which makes it kind of fun. We don't often get a partnership like that across generations unless you've been listening to Kristen and me, because we're across generations.
That's right.
So even though she's not my daughter, I could be her mother as far as the age goes. Well, so who's David Perlmutter?
He is a board-certified neurologist and fellow of the American College of Nutrition. He lectures frequently at the Columbia University, at New York University, Yale, and Harvard.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. He's the author of Grain Brain, Brain Maker, and the Grain Brain Whole Life Plan.
Yeah. And his son is a board-certified internal medicine physician. He received his medical degree from the University of Miami, completed his internal medicine residency at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. His academic interests center on studying the effects of burnout and depression, as well as preventive care and chronic disease management, which is sort of the new wave of physicians coming into practice, I think. Mm-hmm. Which I think is good.
Yeah, I think their stories in the beginning and kind of their experience as they talked through these topics was really interesting and kept me involved in the book. And I can just feel this sense that both of these physicians really care about the results they get with their patients.
Yes, I think that comes across too. And they organized the book in part 1 and part 2. So there's just 2 parts to this book. And they open it up with a really good focus. And this is something I have struggled with. And as we've been through a year of isolation and home-based functioning, people have gotten involved in digital things maybe more heavily than ever before. And so they're talking about the Disconnection Syndrome. That's going to be one of the things that they focus on. They say it's a sad state of affairs, and they have a quote from His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, and it says, "In the materialistic way of life, there's no concept of friendship, no concept of love, just work 24 hours a day like a machine. So in modern society, we eventually also become part of that large moving machine." And then Thomas Jefferson had a really short quote talking about the reward system that drives this other behavior. "Do not bite at the bait of pleasure till you know there is no hook beneath it." So don't take a bite if there's a hook. And these authors think we've taken a bite. We've jumped into online digital connections, and that's got a hook in it that might be harming us.
Right.
And they're going to explore that whole idea. But this book, I felt, was really readable. I like the way they tell their stories. I think they present their ideas in a logical way that's very easy to grasp. And it reminded me of a book that I've read called Alone Together by Sherry Turkle, which I would also recommend if you're going to be interested in this book. It was written maybe 10 to 15 years ago. So this story is out there, and people are beginning to pay attention with concern. We need to pay attention for the wellness of our bodies and our communities.
Right, and signs that you have this disconnection syndrome, or that we as society, is that we're experiencing impulsivity, mindless activity, loneliness, chronic inflammation. We're drawn to instant gratification. Narcissism is an issue, and we're suffering with chronic stress and poor relationships. And I can see this in a lot of people, and even myself, where, with the pandemic, like you mentioned, we've become a little more disconnected as we've had to rely on technology more, and then that's gotten us hooked. Which, can you tell us a little bit about what's like the center of this?
Yeah, and I think what they're going to do in this book, the reason I call it brainwash, is they're going to give us a 10-day brainwashing program that we can maybe recover our balance, that we're out of balance. And they're going to be saying that if we do wash our brains, we'll have better overall health, increased self-worth, reduced inflammation, better relationships, better decision-making, less stress, happiness, and empathy. And the empathy is going to be fun to talk about because I've not heard that discussed like these authors did. But so a little foundational biological thing, is that what you're asking me for?
Yeah, so he goes into the reward pathway and the parts of our brain that are hijacked by these different things that we're doing in today's age. So what are those parts of the brain?
If you read this book, you'll get familiar with the amygdala, you'll get familiar with the prefrontal cortex, you'll get familiar with the hypothalamus, the anterior cingulate gyrus, and the nucleus accumbens, and there's a couple other locations. Now, you don't have to be a neuroanatomist to understand this, because they write it in a language that you get the sense there is a connection. I may not know where these things are, but I believe them. And I say you can believe them because I know where these things are, and they did an accurate job of it. But the cingulate gyrus is in the center of your head, and it connects the right and left hemispheres, and it's a band of white matter. He talks about white matter and gray matter. And the white matter can thin or thicken depending on the health of your brain. And those are the interconnections between some of these pathways. Some of the neurotransmitters that he talks about are dopamine in particular, and we hear about epinephrine and norepinephrine as well. And cortisol, some of the stress hormones. But basically, when you're scrolling your Facebook and you've kind of lost track of what you're doing and something cute shows up and you hit it, they call that clickbait. You heard that term? And the clickbait is also a dopamine button because you like it. And so you get a splurge of this dopamine, and the neurons in your amygdala, which is deep in your brain, respond to that, and they send a connection to your prefrontal cortex usually. But when the dopamine's there, they quit talking to the prefrontal cortex. And what you get is more of a reactive reaction without a connection to your judgment centers, which is your prefrontal cortex, and you then make poorer decisions like, oh, I'll hit the next clickbait, and I'll hit the next clickbait, and all of a sudden you're in a downward spiral, and if you come out of it, you say, where did the time go? And that's because you're working on that little cycle of dopamine, and less connection to, oh, I need to stop this.
Which what I know as the reward pathway.
Exactly.
So something's lighting up in our brain that says, this is great, let's keep doing this. And I also like to think of it as the animal brain, right? The reptilian side of our brain that's just reacting on the stimuli that's in front of us, versus the more logical side of our brain, which would be which part? The prefrontal cortex that
judgment.
That allows us to judge, to sit back and evaluate and think about our decisions rather than just reacting to the stimuli.
Yeah.
And so all that to say is that our brains are very malleable, moldable, and the more you do something that's rewarding, the more you're going to do something, because your brain is set up to remember those feelings, those hits of dopamine.
And that memory center is the hippocampus, and so the hippocampus gets involved in this and says, "Oh, I remember that. Let's do that again."
Right.
Because that felt good.
Right. So that's kind of the hook that we can...
Right, and what they're saying is they concluded that our results suggest that abnormal amygdala function connectivity, which is what we were just talking about, the connectivity to the prefrontal cortex, where you can make a decision, a better one, in young children could be a potential marker of latent risk for poor emotion regulation capacity and may manifest as clinically relevant symptoms later in life. So this idea of putting our kids in front of these screens, and I think in one of our other books, The Food Fix, he brought up, Mark Hyman brought up the idea of food advertising to kids on their screens, that while they're playing a game, all of a sudden here comes a Rice Krispie ad. I'm not sure what, but the idea that the manipulation of these young children is occurring then, and they like that, they're building a stronger reactivity, anxiety-producing pathway, which should be a pleasure pathway, because it also is dose-dependent. The more dopamine, you use it for a level, then you need more, which is the addictive pathway as well. And that's what the opiate system is, the potential for addiction. Once you get the reward center really highlighting and liking it, then you can't step away from stuff because you're not able to connect to the higher reasoning centers. And young children, I mean, it's troubling.
It is troubling. And as I was reading this book, I was actually in the depths of my children waking up and wanting to play their video games over and over. It's the middle of summer and trying to keep them busy in camps, but I'm also working and my husband's working. So it's this real juggle of things. And it's so easy to just say, yes, it's an educational game, so go play that. But then as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm hijacking the reward system. They want instant gratification all the time. And then when I tell them to get off, they just fight nonstop, and they don't know how to be nice to each other.
The emotional capacity is lowered. Yeah, right.
So I'm like, oh my gosh. 1 week technology hiatus right now. So that really happened in my house after reading this book.
And did they adapt to that?
No, they're still asking for it every single day, and it is a battle. But even when it comes back, we're going to restructure how much time and how it's involved. And this was just a different way for me to think about it, how it's influencing the parts of their brain, the prefrontal cortex, which in another book, I'm not going to be able to think of it maybe by the end of this episode, but it was about raising children, how the prefrontal cortex is still growing.
Oh, yes, it is.
And it's not developed.
No.
So I feel like it's the worst time to, re-emphasize the reward, the animal brain. We want to grow the prefrontal cortex and support all of those activities.
Yeah, when you're born, you have a fontanelle there at the top there. The brain plates in your cranium, the top of your head, is flexible to accommodate the growth of the brain.
Yeah.
And, so if it's growing, but the connections between the parts are not being established, that can be trouble. And that what they're saying here is the guilt thing. We've talked about guilt in several of our books.
Yeah, I had a lot of mom guilt on the way over, so
yes,
I was trying to use self-compassion.
We need to release you from that, because what they're suggesting is we're being manipulated. It is not. Technology has good uses in our lives. It has brought us some good functionality and connection, but it also has the dark side of the coin.
Right, and they're kind of exposing the brain chemistry that changes as we get more hooked on technology.
Yeah, but what they're also suggesting is these algorithms that are designed on the back side of this stuff is for monetary gain from someone else. And when you're giving your time to this equipment, they're taking from you information about how your brain works, and they're using it against for commercialization. And that's why the Dalai Lama was saying in the materialistic society we're living in, and they're tapping into that materialistic gain, and it's not for you, it's for somebody else.
What is that show on Netflix?
It's Social Dilemma.
The Social Dilemma.
Yes, and everybody, I think everybody should watch The Social Dilemma. And they interview people who help create these platforms that use these algorithms that are no longer working for them, because they said that's not what we were intending to design. And in this book, they interview a few of them. So that's a tip of the iceberg there. But if you are not aware of the poor use of algorithms are just a mathematical formula, and they can be used for good things too. And so it's just who's using them and why.
Right.
And what's happening to your brain as a result of that is what they're trying to tell us. And we need to wash our brains. Are you familiar with Howard Benson? That's another book he wrote. Howard Benson was the first mind-body physician at a reputable institution. I believe it was Harvard. Might have been Yale. Somebody can check me on that one. But he started he wrote a book called The Relaxation Response many years ago.
Okay.
And it was the idea of how do we relax and is it necessary and what happens, what are the chemicals that are, neurotransmitters. It was a scientific discourse, but also a behavior modification suggestion that we need the relaxation response. We have the stress response that we study. Herbert Benson, yeah. That we have, I just know which institution he was at, Harvard or Yale, when he did that. Or which one. Anyway, yeah, I got it right. Yay. But we study the stress reaction over and over and over. And he said, you know what? I think the mind can control that stress reaction, and he called it the relaxation response. How do you generate the relaxation response? And we've talked about in the breathing, the book Breath, how there's some exercises that can help stimulate that pathway.
And that it's how beneficial it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what I was going to say about my favorite thing about this, well, maybe one of my favorite things about this book is if you've been listening to our podcasts and you haven't read any of those books yet, read this one because this will catch you up. I was so excited because I would be making my notes and saying, ooh, he needs to talk about Nature Deficit Disorder, The Last Child in the Woods by Dr. Love, and flipped the pages, and he did. He referenced it. And I went, yes, he got the right book.
And forest bathing, too.
And forest bathing, yeah. So a lot of the books that we have found in our reading list have been referred to, and this book connects to the Healthy Gut, Healthy Mind, or the Mind-Gut connection, forest bathing. He even connects to the end of food allergies, Why We Sleep, Breath, and The Switch, and Spark, which are books that we've loved. So this is a fun book to read, and it pulls it all together.
Yeah, I agree. And I liked how it connected it to the brain, what's happening in the brain. And, like the telomere effect, we liked that because it did also have some of the common themes that we read about, but it tied it to how it affects the telomeres.
Yeah.
And this one is how those things affect the neurons in our brain and the dopamine response and how we get hooked on these things or disconnected from the world.
Yeah, and I always like it when authors make sort of what I would call an inflammatory statement that I think somebody in some large corporate entity might take issue with. And so one of the ones that they bring up in here, as we begin to explain this whole concept, ultra-processed food is a form of biological warfare.
Oh, wow.
Don't you think that's strong language?
Yes.
Taking over your brain's decision-making and emotional regulation. It activates the addictive brain networks, creating some of the most potent pathways to disease that exist. We often talk about the role of food as medicine, but we must address the terrifying potential of our typical diet to reshape our thoughts, actions, and overall brain makeup. Now, this is not talking about waist-hip ratio. He's talking about the way you think. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm inclined to agree with him slightly, but I do think that's a strong statement.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into it now, but I do have some positive things to say and some not so great things to say about his diet section.
Let's wait a minute because I think that's going to be good. He has another inflammatory thing about it's a quaint statement that I thought was kind of cute. He says, the government tells us that what we're eating is safe. Unfortunately, the data show us otherwise. The foods we eat are not necessarily safe, at least not from the perspective of what the standard American diet can do to the body in the long term. And I think that's interesting too. So the diet affecting your brain, what you eat, can change your thought. And so before we get to his 10-day plan, the other thing that I thought was fun about this book is, well, not fun, but maybe a new angle for me, when he was talking about emotional capacity, he talks about generosity and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes some conclusions about the more we use these digital systems where we're losing ourselves in them and reinforcing that reward pathway and disconnecting from the prefrontal decision-making area. They've tested people, they've done studies, and the results are saying that if the more time you're using and the more active your amygdala is, and they can do that with MRI, some of the light up positron emission studies, you can light up a brain if it's active based on the physiology that we know about it. Not to go into detail, but anyway, so they use those kinds of tests, and people were less likely to be generous and make gifts or think about someone else's well-being, or even to put themselves in someone else's shoes, which is what empathy is that I can understand you. I may not agree with you, but I can understand you. And when we're separating these two things, I don't understand you and I don't like you, and we get polarized.
Right.
And that's another thing that I think a lot of us in my conversations with people have acknowledged. We're in America right now very polarized. And maybe it's because our brains need washing, that we can understand each other. I mean, there have been other times in our history where we had differences of opinion, but we could tolerate each other.
Right. And now with social media, they show that we're farther and farther away from each other.
Mm-hmm. And being able to understand what is accurate information, we're losing the ability to track or verify information that we get. Mm-hmm. And so this word false, fake news is out there, but people just take news, but and they're saying we shouldn't listen to it. It's another negativity thing here. The more of that you listen to, the more your amygdala gets fearful and anxiety, and then you get depressed and you have these disease syndromes.
Right.
Yeah.
They talked about how the news, they looked at it over time, and it has become increasingly more negative.
Mm-hmm. This social media is encouraging narcissism,
which is the perfect platform to say I am the best or highlight.
And that's a really disconnected place to be as a narcissist. But the idea of look at me, look at me, look at me, I'm showing you me, and here I am, that can't be good. So yeah, the plus side of the connectivity probably is very small compared to the bad side of the connectivity. And I have become of the opinion. Not the opinion, but I'm flirting with an idea in our lives. And if you're lucky to have a long life like I have, there are times like let's say in your schooling, you're close with a peer group, and then everybody disperses and goes somewhere else, and lives get full. And then there's maybe the time of childbearing where you have a community of people doing similar things with young children. If you're doing that in your life, or you have a work family.
Right.
But as jobs change, you don't see those people as intimately as you did. And then life goes on, and it's like you were close to, you walked with me for part of the journey I'm on, and then we diverged. Now we're trying to bring everybody back into where we are now, and maybe that's not a natural thing. Maybe some of these relationships need
are meant to grow apart.
To leave. Yeah. Because you can't maintain 5,000 close friends. You can't. I mean, I don't think it's possible. You can be very superficial about it. But the idea of relationship really has to do with time and presence. And I think we're fooling ourselves about the quality of the relationships that we're maintaining, perhaps. And then we start doing emoji responses to each other, not even word responses. Is that quality?
That's such a good point. There's a time and a place for everything, including relationships.
And it hurts a little bit to say, I'm letting you go. But maybe that's what we do, is we let each other go to find what the next thing for each of us is.
Right, rather than trying to maintain
to hold too
superficial.
tight, and to bring back. And then it's delightful when you cross paths again and you say, hey,
let's catch up.
And you don't really have to catch up because you know the person. So, I mean, it's really, people say I picked up right where I left off. You've heard that before, right?
Yeah.
And you do, because you know these people. You've shared these really intimate, and I don't mean sexually intimate. I just mean close. You get close to people. You share injuries and celebrations.
You share more than just the highlights.
Yeah.
Social media is highlights, but true relationships and friendships you can call when things aren't going well, or you can be real with them when things aren't going well.
Yeah. So that idea has been flirting. And we read the Blue Zones, and the Blue Zones talked about the little ladies drinking their mugwort vodka, and they would get together at 3:00. They didn't call each other on the phone. They walked to each other's houses and sat down and spent an hour together, and then went back to their drudgery. But they lived these happy, long lives, and they were small lives. They weren't big lives.
Right.
So I think the brainwashing is interesting. But I had on 109, he mentions this thing that struck me. It jumped out of me, talking about another book called Sapiens. Have you all read Sapiens?
No.
It's on my list. I'll let you know if I get to it. It should be good. But anyway, they talk about this Amanda Mummert, who is a research scientist at the IBM Watson Health. Now, what is IBM Watson Health? I haven't looked it up, but it looked like an oxymoron to me when we're talking about this disconnection syndrome generated by technology, and IBM is looking at Watson Health. She studies the history of human health and cultural factors in disease processes. And according to her, empirical studies of societies shifting subsistence from foraging to primary food production have found evidence for deteriorating health from an increase in infections and dental disease and a rise in nutritional deficiencies. So the development of agriculture decreased food diversity and has produced more disease. So IBM is looking at that.
Interesting.
I think that, I don't know, maybe it's IBM Benevolent Giving. I don't know. But I'm going to look that up a little bit, maybe in one of our
IBM Watson Health is committed to helping build smarter health ecosystems. This means working with you to help achieve simpler processes, better care insights, faster breakthroughs, and improved experiences for people around the world. The combination of our core strengths, our deep industry experience in our health, our technology solutions, including options for AI and data analytics, and our reputation for trust and security, helps us deliver support to our clients' digital transformations.
Thank you, Timothy Beeman.
You're welcome.
We love having you as a reference looker-upper. Yeah, so I bet you they're going to write an app for that, aren't they?
Probably.
Yeah, and aren't we getting to some of these sensors that we're, putting patches on our skin and using the apps to tell us our levels of blood, for diabetes, blood sugars and things. So IBM probably has a great interest in health issues because there's probably a market there for AI, as you said.
Right, and I think it would behoove them to actually have an understanding of the industry they're going into, not just making equipment, because they need to know how the equipment works and what builds it up. So I'm sure they hired real health professionals to help them put this together.
But when I'm saying in my business, I have a lot of pressure to be active in social media and social marketing and digital messaging. And as a health advocate, I am conflicted. I'm going, how can I be a health advocate and encourage this? I'm struggling with it. So we'll have to watch and see how my story plays out. But
I saw a really great social media post the other day that said, "This is your reminder to turn off your phone and go out and play." So you can send out reminders like that.
Yeah. Maybe so.
Well, Eleanor, clearly we have a lot to say about this book and this conversation. And
who knew? Who
knew, right? Well, probably because it's such a great summary of all of the topics we've talked about in the past. But before, we go on too much, I think that we're going to have to take a break. And in the next episode, we will dive into the 10-day detox program and what he recommends doing to brainwash.
I love it. I think that's a great idea.
And to cure the disconnection syndrome.
Well, I'm Eleanor Russell, 360health4u.com. And if you're interested in how I can help you with some of the recommendations in this book, reach out to me.
And I'm Kristen Norton of Well Balanced Nutrition, and I'd love for you to come visit our website, wellbalancednutrition.com, and join all that we have going on in August related to meal planning. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.